just want to welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Olivia, and I am a junior studying international relations at Stanford. Within international relations, I am passionate about national security and military history. I also happen to really love looking at art. And at my time at Stanford, I've learned that there exists an interesting intersection between war and art. And that's what I want to talk with you all about today. But before I do, I want to say that one of the things I love most about art is that there's no single correct interpretation or correct way to look at an art piece. I want you all to keep this in mind, and I encourage you all to start forming your own interpretations as I give my reading of two pieces in the Cantor's collection. I'll be spending around 20 minutes sharing my thoughts, and then I want to spend the last 10 opening the floor up to you all for discussion or to answer any questions that you all have. So I want to encourage you all to leave your questions or comments in the chat as we go. And I'll try to get to those either during my prepared remarks or at those last 10 minutes. I myself also will be asking you all questions during my tour. And if you want to answer, you can just put your answers in the chat. Really no pressure. The questions are just a way for you to engage with looking at the art pieces. So with that, I think, yes, thank you, Mackenzie. Yeah, so with that, let's get started. This painting is Der Krieg by artist Max Slivogt. What first jumped out to me when I looked at this painting was its horizontality. Slivogt cuts off our view of most of the sky and ground, and to me, he does so intentionally to direct our eye to what is seen in the foreground or the front of the painting. We can't really escape from what he wants us to focus on. And so when I say that, what do you all see then in the foreground or in the front of the painting here? Again, you can just put your answers in the chat. I figured to help you maybe better view the details in this painting, because the painting is sort of horizontal and because we're looking at it on a screen, it might actually be helpful to crop the painting into 3 parts. So I want to go through those cropped images as well for you all, give you some time to look through them, and then we'll come back and look at the piece as a whole. So this is the leftmost part of the painting. What do you all see here? You can drop a couple of words in the chat if you want to answer, and I'll go over them when we return to look at the piece as a whole. The colors, shapes, objects, whatever stands out to you. Great. Okay, we're going to look now at the second piece of this painting, which is the middle portion. Again, same thing. If anything stands out to you, you can put that in the chat. And then finally, this is the rightmost portion of the painting. So now this is the piece again as a whole. I just want to go over some of the answers that you all put in the chat, which I think are really, really insightful and really interesting. So some of you put, you see nude bodies, you see people fighting, bodies in action, women fleeing in fear, the bird watching in the middle there, a vulture maybe, guns, death, and individuals fighting, combat. And yeah, that's really what we see. We see fire, smoke, people lunging at one another, swords, guns, violence, chaos. We see war. And so given what we see here, does anyone maybe want to guess what the title Der Krieg means? You can also guess what the language is. Either is great. Just put that in the chat. Yeah, so the Krieg is German for the war. As you all are mentioning in the comments, that's exactly right. So translated, the title is The War, and it's in the language German. Slivogt painted this piece in 1915. So maybe with those pieces in mind, Germany in 1915, Does anyone want to take a guess what conflict might be depicted in this painting? Yeah, so as someone mentioned, it's World War I. And World War I lasted from 1914 to 1918. It initially began in Europe between the great powers of the time, which were France, England, Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary. It, however, would spread to include countries across the globe, including Turkey, Japan, the United States, and European colonies in Asia and Africa. While scholars today still debate over the underlying reasons behind the start of the conflict, there's no debate about the brutality of the war. The total number of military and civilian casualties from World War I is estimated to be around 40 million people. This high number is largely seen due to innovations in military technology, such as modern artillery and machine guns, which made traditional formations on the battlefield a death sentence. To avoid this machine gun fire, soldiers dug in trenches, and the war became static and immobile, which only really added to the horror that they were experiencing. This war was so catastrophic that in its aftermath, people called it the Great War and the war to end all wars. Living in the 21st century, we know that unfortunately, there would be a second, even larger world war that would follow. But at the time, World War I was a conflict of unprecedented scale. It's unsurprising then just how much World War I featured in the art and the culture of the time. To look at examples outside of the visual art space for a second, World War I had an enormous influence on the literature written at the time and in the following years. So during the war, American author Ernest Hemingway volunteered to serve in Italy as an ambulance driver for the Red Cross, and his experiences inspired his first best-selling novel, A Farewell to Arms, which is set during the Italian campaign of World War I. I myself am a huge fantasy fan, and one of the most famous fantasy authors of all time, J.R.R. Tolkien, served as an officer in the British Army during World War I. And in the trenches, he actually wrote on scraps of paper little vignettes and stories that would serve as the mythological basis for the Lord of the Rings. Returning to this painting here, Max de Vogt, the artist, also witnessed war firsthand. Just some background information on him. He was born in 1868 in Germany, and he studied art at the Munich Academy and in Paris. De Vogt focused on capturing rapid impressions of his subjects, which you can see here in his brushstroke work. It's very visible, and you see a lot of movement. Prior to World War I, he was known actually for his landscapes and his portraiture, which he's still known for today. But in October 1914, with the outbreak of World War I, he volunteered to act as a war painter. And I find his background in art here really interesting because in Decree, we don't see a landscape and we don't see a focus on an individual like we would in a portrait. Instead, we get this panoramic view of people engaged in conflict. I also find it interesting that de Vogt, despite being a commissioned war artist and despite volunteering for this role, didn't want to make this a traditionally realistic image of battlefront. In Decree here, with his color choices, the visible brushstrokes, the images, as you all mentioned, of nude figures, Decree looks more like it could be an allegory or a representation of hell, and it doesn't necessarily look like what conflict would appear in the trenches. But what I want to suggest is maybe rather than depict a realistic image of war, de Vogt is interested in capturing a realistic feeling of war, showing the violence, the fighting, and the chaos. We also see in this painting that he doesn't depict war in a morale-raising or glorifying way, which again is interesting because he started off as a volunteer and he wanted to paint images on the battlefield. But after joining the 6th Bavarian Army at the Western Front in World War I, de Vogt's initial enthusiasm for the war ended up waning Witnessing this combat firsthand really took a toll on him, and he ended up only spending a few weeks at the front before he returned home. And since that experience, all of his depictions of World War I would come to focus on the horrors of the conflict. So in addition to Decree, which we have at the Cantor, Zwivocht produced a portfolio of lithographs on the First World War. You can see here his lithograph titled The Mothers, which shows women mourning the deaths of their sons on the battlefield. Here's another example of a lithograph he's done called Shellfire, and it depicts skeletal figures as representations of death, and they're riding these artillery shells. The traumas of World War I had an especially powerful influence on art in Germany, since it was a losing power in the conflict. Injuries, both mental and physical, from World War I would appear as a common theme in the works of Zwivocht's contemporaries, many of whom also served as soldiers in the German army. So here, we see two pieces. The one on the left is called The Scat Players by Otto Dix, and it shows wounded veterans playing cards. The piece on the right is called The Night by Max Beckmann, who, similar to Zwivocht, volunteered in the medical corps at the start of World War I, but he was discharged after having a nervous breakdown in 1915. These works by Otto Dix, by Max Beckmann, and by Zwivocht would come to be viewed as degenerate art by the Nazis, and they would be viewed as paintings that showed moral corruption. Zwivocht himself died in 1932, a year before Hitler became chancellor in Germany, so he didn't experience the brunt of this. But his contemporaries like Dix and Beckmann would find themselves censored, dismissed from art teaching positions, and their works ridiculed, seized, and burned. Hitler was concerned not only about the moral quality of these works, but also the power of these paintings to inspire pacifism among the German public at a time that he was getting ready to wage war against the rest of the world. And while Nazi Germany represents a more extreme example of artistic censorship during wartime, all nations in World War II concerned themselves with the effects of art and entertainment on public morale. In the United States, for example, the Office of War Information under President Franklin Roosevelt worked with film studios, radio stations, cartoonists, and artists across the country to produce films, songs, posters, and radio broadcasts encouraging everyday Americans to cooperate with the government's wartime programs. So there's actually a really good documentary about this on Netflix called Five Came Back, about 5 Hollywood filmmakers who enlisted and used their talents during World War II to contribute to the war effort. I recommend you all checking it out on Netflix if you are interested. So government's concerns about messages in art and their attempts to regulate art in times of war, I think really highlights art's power. There exists a two-way street in the relationship between art and war. Just as how war can shape artists' perceptions of the world, so too can art and culture shape our perceptions of war. Let's see. We have a question here. What was the title again of the documentary? It is 5 Came Back. I'll put it in the chat at the end of the talk so you all can check it out. So I want to end with us all looking at this item here. Does anyone want to take a guess what this might be? You can put it again in the chat. Yes, thank you, Kate. Yeah, yes, bullet shells, yes. So this is a bullet cartridge from the Siege of Paris, which was not a part of World War I, but it was a part of the Franco-Prussian War from 1870 to 1871. And we possess this cartridge at the Cantor because it was a part of Leland Stanford Jr.'s personal collection of knickknacks and items before he passed away in 1884. Leland Stanford Jr. was an American. He wasn't French, he wasn't German. and he was only 2 during the Franco-Prussian War. Yet he collected this cartridge, so it must have meant something to him. In fact, he collected a lot of items relating to war before he passed away. Here's a slide of just a couple. You can see here the 2 pieces of a flag from the Civil War, a bullet from the Siege of Paris, buttons and insignia from the Spanish Army. And these objects are all actually on view currently at the Cantor as part of the Melancholy Museum exhibition. So if you get a chance to visit the Cantor in person, I highly recommend seeing these pieces in real life. Looking at this collection of items from Stanford Junior, I think it's worth reflecting on why people are drawn to representations and stories of war. There's no clear answer, and I don't know what Leland Stanford Jr. was thinking, but I at least can give why I am interested in international relations and why I find military history so interesting. War is a terrible tragedy, made even more tragic by the fact that it is carried out against people by other people. Studying military history and international relations hopefully can help us avoid making the same mistakes as our predecessors and help us prevent wars in the future. Additionally, in studying war, I think you really see the full range of the human experience. You see the very worst in people, and you also see sometimes instances of the very best. You learn about stories of bravery and compassion, and also about terrible atrocities and suffering. I think sometimes trying to capture this more human element of war can be a hard thing to do. How do you represent war and talk about war in a way that balances big picture developments in the conflict with individual experiences of people on the ground? And this was a question that really came to my mind first when I watched the documentary, They Shall Not Grow Old, a 2018 World War I documentary by Peter Jackson, who coincidentally also directed the Lord of the Rings movies. So I think that's really interesting. You can rent this documentary on Amazon Prime. It's fantastic. But the director, Jackson, takes a unique approach to this film. Rather than run through the chronology of World War I, giving you dates of major battles and the like, he really focuses on the individual stories of the soldiers and the veterans of that war. For this film, he uses World War I archival footage from the British Imperial War Museum, and he colorizes it. These film reels also didn't have any sound. So what he ended up doing was he took excerpts from oral histories of the veterans from World War I, and he overlaid that as the narration to the film. So I think this film really captures the more human, personal, individual experiences of people during war. And it caused me to reflect on my experiences studying international relations. I sometimes find myself focusing on, the more abstract concepts behind why countries behave the way they do during conflict, why they might enter a conflict. And sometimes I feel like I can lose sight of the impact of war on individual people. As someone fortunate also to live in safety, I have a barrier when it comes to understanding the experience of war. And this is especially true when studying past conflicts, since I'm not only removed from the location, but also the time of the war. Wars and deaths also can occur on such a large scale that it's hard to reconcile or fully absorb the numbers that are involved in the high casualties. Yet I think learning about the personal experiences of war is not only respectful to the people involved in the conflict, but it's also crucial to our understanding of the nature of war, why it occurs, and why it plays out the way that it does. For these reasons, I think depictions of war in art, like in They Shall Not Grow Old, like in The Krieg, are so important in capturing these personal stories and these personal experiences. So with that, thank you all so much for listening. I'd love to take any questions now, and I want to open it up to you all for discussion. I also want to let you all know that the Cantor is open. The Anderson will reopen in the fall, but there are objects from the Anderson in the Cantor, so definitely recommend you all to check that out. Because of COVID, we are limiting the number of people who are allowed in the museum at a time. And to do that, we ask you all to sign up for these free time tickets. Again, they're free. It's just to make sure and help us keep a count of how many people are in the building at a time. So yeah, thank you all so much. If you have any questions, please drop it in the chat. I also see, at least in my camera, that I'm lagging, so hopefully you all can hear me. Please let me know about, please let me know if you're having trouble hearing me. Yeah, so we have some comments. You might be interested in the artist Kathy Kolowitz's work that are incredibly moving and sad concerning World War I. Yes, absolutely. I would recommend, if you're interested in art from World War I, you check out, especially German art from World War I, you check out any pieces by Kathy Kolowitz. Let's see here. Okay. Someone asked, can I go into more detail about the main painting? Okay, so let's see here. Oh, sorry. Let's start presentations. Okay, we'll just start from the beginning, that's fine. Okay, yes. Artists I suggest in the chat. Okay. So sorry, I will get to this painting. I'm just gonna put a couple of people are asking for names of artists, so I'm gonna put that in the chat for everyone. Expecting I think also someone asked, oh no, we already got the name of the documentary. The documentaries are 5 Came Back, and also, let's see, They Shall Not Grow Old. Okay. I think that's everything. Please let me know if you want any more recommendations. Okay, yeah, so coming back to this original painting here, would someone want to, like, the person who put the question in the chat, do you want to maybe ask more specifically what you're interested in learning about? I can talk a little bit more about, you know, maybe some of the techniques that he used, or yeah, just whatever you're interested in. So the question is, was this oil on canvas? So this here, let's see if I can pull up. I figure you might actually all want to see the information on the bottom. So no, this is oil on board. And yeah, you can see maybe some more of the biographical information here as well. Spivak, the artist, was alive from 1868 to 1932. Like I mentioned, he passed away right before Hitler became Chancellor in Germany. Okay, so the bird, someone's asking if the bird is a German imperial symbol. That's a good question. I wasn't able to find a direct answer in my research, but I do think that's a highly probable and very valid interpretation of what that bird is. I also liked, someone put as an answer earlier when we were looking at this part of the painting that it could be a vulture. So I think both are possible. When I first saw this painting, I thought that it was, you know, the German eagle. That was a symbol of the military. So it's hard to tell because Spivak's style, again, is not focused so much on realistic details. We get more of the impression or the feeling of the figures and the movement and the energy there. So someone asks, is there an especially memorable or important class that you've taken focused on war and conflict? That's a really good question. I've taken a lot of really awesome classes. So my freshman spring, I took this class called Peoples, Armies, and Governments of the Second World War. And I actually came into Stanford as an undecided major. I didn't know what I wanted to study at all. And that class is what really gave me direction and shown me that I was interested in international relations and war. And I guess what I found so compelling about the class, or what I found so interesting about the class, was that the professor did a very good job of trying to put us in the mindset of the people at the time in that conflict. So she really emphasized, people studying history, people can have a tendency of thinking events are inevitable, but they're not, especially if you put yourselves in the mindset of the people at the time. They're acting without information that we as observers have, right? So how is that influencing their decision making? And that's something that I found super, super interesting and inspired me to take more classes. I also took a really, really awesome class with that same professor on various battles throughout world history, or various modern battles. And what we did was we sat in on staff rides. So what that is basically, simulation is a strong word. It's not like we all dressed up in uniforms and stuff and appeared at this in class, but basically we tried to follow individual generals' actions during the conflict. And so it was kind of like we were playing out the war again, and we were seeing how individual decisions made the war change and shaped conflict. So I thought that those two classes were really, really awesome. Yeah, so the title of the class my freshman year was Peoples, Armies, and Governments of the Second World War. And then the class with the staff rides is called The Modern Battle. And both are taught by the same professor, Professor Gilly Vardy. Let's see, I can put the name in the chat. Yes, yes. And then The Modern Battle. Yeah, and those are just the two that first come to mind, but I've loved all of my international relations classes here at Stanford. So yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. We are approaching the end of the presentation, or we're approaching 12:30, so I want to be conscious of everyone's time and let you all go. Thank you so much for coming.